Marcus Reed had been hauling cargo through the Nexus corridor for 3 years without once regretting his decision to avoid anything that might require actual human interaction. The shipping contracts were simple, the isolation was therapeutic, and most importantly, nobody expected him to save anyone or be responsible for outcomes that mattered. Which made the distress signal crackling through his comm system at 0400 ship time feel like the universe's particularly cruel idea of irony. Mayday, Mayday, this is Transport Vessel Serenity's Dream, we are under attack by unknown vessels. Requesting immediate assistance from any ships in the area. The voice was desperate, professional, and exactly the kind of problem Marcus had spent 3 years avoiding. He reached for the comm controls to switch to a different frequency, then paused as another voice broke through the static, younger, terrified, speaking in a language he didn't recognize but with a tone that needed no translation. Someone was screaming. Not my problem, Marcus muttered, his finger hovering over the channel selector. He'd learned the hard way that trying to help people usually ended with everyone worse off than when you started. Better to mind your own business, deliver your cargo, collect your payment, and pretend the universe wasn't full of situations that decent people were supposed to do something about. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by silence that somehow felt worse than the terror. Marcus stared at the comm display for 30 seconds, cursing his apparently non-functioning sense of self-preservation, then changed course toward the distress signal's coordinates. This is a terrible idea, he informed his ship's computer, which responded with the kind of electronic chirp that suggested agreement. The Lucky Strike wasn't built for heroics. She was a modified cargo hauler with decent shields, basic weapons, and a medical bay that Marcus had upgraded during his brief period of optimism about helping people. She handled like a brick in atmosphere but could outrun most trouble in space, which had kept Marcus alive through several decisions that qualified as aggressively stupid by any reasonable standard. The source of the distress signal appeared on his sensors as he approached, a large transport vessel dead in space, its hull breached in multiple locations, surrounded by debris that suggested the attacking ships had already fled. Marcus ran passive scans, looking for life signs and trying to determine if this was a legitimate emergency or an elaborate pirate trap designed to lure in good Samaritans. Life signs detected, his computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Multiple species, approximately 40 individuals, vital signs indicate severe distress. Marcus armed his ship's weapons and approached cautiously, scanning for hidden attackers while studying the transport's configuration. It was definitely a slave ship, the internal layout showed cramped holding cells, minimal life support, and the kind of structural modifications that prioritized cargo capacity over passenger comfort. The attackers had hit the command deck and engine room but left the cargo holds intact, suggesting they'd been interrupted rather than successful. This is Marcus Reed aboard the Lucky Strike, he broadcast on emergency frequencies. Serenity's Dream, please respond. Silence stretched for long minutes before a weak signal came through. Thank the void you came back. We thought, the pirates said they'd killed anyone who might respond to our signal. I'm not back, I'm new, Marcus corrected, maneuvering closer to the transport's main airlock. What's your status? Main power's gone, life support failing in sections 7 through 12. We've got wounded, and the cargo. The voice broke. They're slaves, Reed. Mostly Lyrians, some other species. The pirates killed the crew but left the prisoners. I think they're coming back with a bigger ship. Marcus felt the familiar weight of moral obligation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 40 lives, most of them belonging to a species known for their empathic abilities and peaceful nature. The kind of people who ended up as slaves because they were too gentle to fight back effectively. How long do we have? He asked, already knowing he was committed to whatever came next. Maybe an hour before life support fails completely. The pirates said they'd be back in 3 hours with a hauler. Marcus docked with the transport and cycled through the airlock, his medical kit in one hand and a sidearm in the other. The interior was a testament to casual cruelty. Cramped cells designed to hold sentient beings like cargo, air recycling systems that provided just enough oxygen to keep the merchandise alive, and lighting that was dim enough to cause psychological stress without quite qualifying as torture. He found the source of the distress signal in what had been the ship's medical bay, a human crew member named Torres who'd taken shrapnel to the leg and was bleeding steadily despite field dressings. "You're really here," Torres said, relief evident in his voice. "I thought I was hallucinating. Where are the prisoners?" Marcus asked, administering pain medication and proper bandages while scanning for other survivors. "Cargo hold 3. That's where most of them are, anyway. The Lyrians, they're in bad shape. Pirates used neural prods on them, messed with their empathic abilities. There's one female who's been trying to keep the others calm, but she's hurt worse than she's letting on." Marcus made his way to Cargo Hold 3, following the sound of soft voices speaking in musical tones. The sight that greeted him made something cold and angry settle in his chest. Dozens of beings crowded into a space designed for half their number, most showing signs of malnutrition, abuse, and recent violence. The air was thick with fear and pain that he could almost taste. But what caught his attention was the figure in the center of the group, a woman with skin that had a subtle silvery sheen and ears that curved gracefully to pointed tips. She was clearly injured, one arm hung at an odd angle, and there were burn marks on her neck from what looked like neural prod contact, but she was moving among the other prisoners, offering comfort with gentle touches and quiet words. Their eyes met across the crowded hold, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Her gaze was direct, intelligent, and carried a depth of compassion that made his careful emotional distance feel suddenly ridiculous. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, and although he didn't understand the language, her meaning was unmistakable: "Help them." Marcus moved through the crowd, his medical training taking over as he assessed injuries and distributed supplies. The Lyrians responded to his presence with cautious hope, their large eyes tracking his movements as he worked. But it was the silver-skinned woman who held his attention, even as he tried to focus on triage protocols. She approached him as he finished stabilizing a young Lyrian with a head injury, moving carefully to avoid jostling her damaged arm. When she reached out and touched his hand, Marcus felt a sudden rush of images and emotions that weren't his own: gratitude, relief, and something that felt like recognition. Telepathic contact, he realized, though he'd never experienced anything like it before. Through the connection, he sensed her name, Zara. He also felt her assessment of his intentions. She was reading his emotional state, determining whether he was genuinely there to help or represented some new threat. What she found seemed to satisfy her, because she smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. It transformed her face completely, turning exhaustion and pain into something that approached hope. "We need to move fast," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if she understood English. "More pirates are coming." Zara tilted her head, then placed her hand on his forehead. Images flowed between them: the layout of his ship, the capacity of his cargo holds, the time constraints they faced. She understood perfectly, and she was already organizing the other prisoners for evacuation. Marcus had expected the transfer to be chaotic, desperate, marked by panic and confusion. Instead, he watched Zara coordinate the entire operation through touch telepathy, calming fears and organizing the group with remarkable efficiency. Even injured, she was clearly a natural leader. "She's remarkable," Torres observed as they helped the last of the prisoners board the Lucky Strike. "Been looking after the others since they were captured 2 weeks ago. Hasn't complained once about her own injuries." Marcus glanced back at Zara, who was settling the younger prisoners in his cargo bay with the kind of gentle authority that spoke of natural empathy and hard-won wisdom. "What happened to her arm?" "Broken in 3 places when she tried to protect some kids from a pirate's neural prod. Could have been healed easily with proper medical equipment, but..." Torres shrugged. "Slaves don't get proper medical care." The words hit Marcus harder than they should have. He'd seen plenty of cruelty during his military service, witnessed enough casual brutality to develop a protective layer of cynicism about sentient nature. But something about Zara's quiet courage and selfless behavior was cutting through defenses he'd thought were permanent. "Get everyone secured," he told Torres as they sealed the airlock. "We're getting out of here before the pirates come back." As the Lucky Strike pulled away from the abandoned transport, Marcus felt a hand touch his shoulder. Zara stood behind his pilot's chair, her good arm resting gently against him. Through the contact, he felt her gratitude, not just for the rescue, but for the simple fact that someone had cared enough to risk themselves for strangers. But there was something else in the connection, something that made Marcus's breath catch. She was sensing the carefully buried pain he carried, the guilt and loss that had driven him to isolation. Her empathic abilities were reading years of self-imposed emotional exile, and instead of judgment or pity, he felt understanding. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Reed felt like someone actually saw him, not the cargo pilot he'd become, but the person he'd been before the war had taken everything that mattered. And somehow, despite everything she'd endured, Zara was offering him something he'd thought was lost forever, the possibility of genuine human connection. "Thank you," she said, the words coming out in accented but clear English. "For saving us. For caring." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd thought he was just rescuing slaves from pirates, but as he watched Zara move carefully back to tend to the other survivors, he realized she'd already begun saving something in return. "Course laid in for Frontier Station Alpha," his computer announced. "Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Marcus settled back in his pilot's chair, acutely aware of the lives now depending on him and the silver-skinned woman whose touch had awakened something he'd thought was dead. For the first time in years, he was responsible for outcomes that mattered. Somehow, that didn't feel like a burden anymore. Frontier Station Alpha had always reminded Marcus of a cancerous growth attached to the hull of a dying ship, sprawling, chaotic, and somehow managing to survive despite violating several laws of physics and common sense. The station's lower levels were a maze of improvised corridors, black market vendors, and the kind of establishments that didn't ask questions as long as your credits were legitimate. It was exactly the sort of place where 40 liberated slaves might disappear quietly into the general population. Unfortunately, it was also the sort of place where corrupt officials made a living by asking the wrong kinds of questions. "Docking Bay 7 is cleared for approach," the station's traffic control announced with the bored efficiency of someone who'd processed 1,000 identical requests that day. "Standard docking fees apply, plus a 50-credit surcharge for biological cargo inspection." Marcus felt Zara's hand tighten on his shoulder. She'd insisted on staying in the cockpit during their approach, claiming her empathic abilities could help him navigate potential threats. Through their growing connection, he sensed her sudden spike of fear at the mention of biological cargo inspection. "Biological cargo?" Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'm hauling machine parts and processed foods. Nothing biological on my manifest." "Negative, Lucky Strike. Our sensors are detecting multiple alien life signs aboard your vessel. Standard procedure requires inspection and documentation of all non-human passengers." Marcus exchanged glances with Zara, seeing his own concern reflected in her amber eyes. "They know," she said quietly, her accent making the words sound like music despite their ominous meaning. "Someone told them we were coming." Torres mentioned that the pirates said they'd be back, Marcus muttered, checking his ship's defensive systems. "Maybe they had contacts on the station." Through the viewports, Frontier Station Alpha looked like exactly what it was, a lawless frontier outpost where money talked and justice was negotiable. But it was also their only option for getting proper medical care for the injured Lyrians, and Marcus had enough experience with bureaucratic corruption to know that playing along was usually safer than running. "Copy that, Control," he said finally. "Requesting priority docking for medical emergency. I've got injured passengers who need immediate attention." "Understood. Dock at Bay 7 and remain aboard your vessel until station security can process your passengers." The docking procedure went smoothly enough, but Marcus felt increasingly uneasy as he watched security teams assembling on the station's observation deck. Too many guards, too much equipment, and the kind of organized efficiency that suggested they'd been expecting exactly this situation. Something's wrong, Zara said, her empathic abilities apparently picking up hostile intentions from the station personnel. They're not here to help. They're here to take us back. Marcus was reaching for his ship's communication controls when the main airlock's override sequence activated from the outside. Station security was boarding without permission, never a good sign in Marcus's experience. All passengers and crew remain calm and comply with security protocols, a voice announced through the ship's internal comm system. This is a routine inspection for the safety of all station residents. Captain Voss entered Marcus's cargo bay like a man surveying his personal property, flanked by 6 armed guards and carrying the kind of swagger that came from years of unchecked authority. He was tall, pale, and had the soft look of someone who'd spent too many years collecting bribes and not enough time dealing with actual problems. Marcus Reed, Voss said, consulting a data pad with theatrical attention to detail. Freelance cargo pilot, clean record, no outstanding warrants. Quite the good Samaritan, aren't we? Just happened to be in the area when I picked up a distress signal, Marcus replied, positioning himself between Voss and a group of Lyrian refugees who'd gathered protectively around Zara. Standard spacer protocol, you help people in trouble. How admirable, Voss said, though his tone suggested he found altruism personally offensive. Of course, harboring escaped slaves is a serious crime under Galactic Trade Consortium regulations. Penalties include fines, imprisonment, and forfeiture of vessel. These aren't escaped slaves, Marcus said, his military training helping him project calm authority despite the rapidly deteriorating situation. They're survivors of a pirate attack on a transport vessel. I have the distress signal recordings and testimony from a crew member. Ah yes, Torres. Voss smiled with the kind of predatory satisfaction that made Marcus's skin crawl. Tragic what happened to him during the pirate attack. Shot while trying to resist, I'm told. Very heroic. Marcus felt his blood go cold. Torres had been injured but stable when they'd left the transport, certainly not dying. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Voss replied with false innocence. Pirates are very thorough, you know. Can't have witnesses contradicting the official story. Behind Marcus, he heard Zara whisper something in her own language that needed no translation. The other Lyrians were clustering closer together, their empathic abilities undoubtedly sensing the threat that Voss represented. Here's what's going to happen, Voss continued, gesturing to his guards. You're going to turn over all 43 of these escaped slaves for proper processing. They'll be returned to their legal owners, minus a reasonable handling fee for the inconvenience. You'll pay a fine for interfering with lawful commerce, and everyone goes home happy. And if I refuse? Voss's smile widened. Then you'll be charged with slave trafficking, piracy, and conspiracy to defraud legitimate business interests. Your ship will be impounded, your assets frozen, and you'll spend the next 20 years in a consortium penal colony. The slaves will still be returned to their owners, of course. Marcus looked at the 43 beings whose lives now hung in the balance. Most were Lyrians, but there were also representatives of a dozen other species, all of whom had endured weeks or months of captivity and abuse. Zara stood at the front of the group, her injured arm cradled against her chest but her bearing radiating quiet defiance. You have 30 seconds to decide, Voss announced, checking his chronometer with theatrical precision. That's when Zara stepped forward and placed her hand on Marcus's arm. The telepathic contact was stronger this time, more focused, and through it he felt something unexpected, determination backed by tactical intelligence. She wasn't asking him to sacrifice himself for her, she was offering to work together to find a way out. Images flowed between them, station schematics from the refugees' observations during boarding, security patrol patterns that Zara's empathic abilities had detected, and a desperate plan that might actually work if they could coordinate perfectly. I need more time to consider your offer, Marcus said to Voss, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, bathing the cargo bay in red illumination that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. Voss spun around, barking orders at his guards while trying to reach station security on his communicator. System malfunction in Section C, a voice announced over the station's general comm. All personnel remain calm while maintenance crews investigate the power fluctuation. Marcus felt Zara's hand squeeze his arm, their signal to move. While Voss's guards were distracted by the sudden darkness, Marcus led the group of refugees toward his ship's secondary airlock, using emergency lighting and Zara's empathic sensing to navigate around the confused security team. They made it to the station's maintenance level before running into serious opposition. 3 guards emerged from a side corridor, weapons drawn and clearly looking for escaped slaves. Marcus was reaching for his sidearm when a new voice cut through the tension. "Hey, uglies! Over here!" The distraction came from a maintenance shaft above their heads, where a figure in stained coveralls was hanging upside down, grinning with the kind of manic enthusiasm that suggested either courage or severe mental instability. The guards turned toward the voice just as something small and spherical dropped from the shaft. The flashbang grenade went off with enough force to leave everyone temporarily deaf and blind. When Marcus's vision cleared, the 3 guards were unconscious, and the figure from the maintenance shaft was standing over them with a smoking plasma torch and a prosthetic arm that looked like it had been assembled from spare starship parts. "Finn McCarthy," the newcomer said, extending his artificial hand in greeting. "Smuggler, part-time revolutionary, and full-time pain in Captain Voss's backside. You folks look like you could use some help. Why would you help us?" Marcus asked, still trying to process what had just happened. "Because Voss killed my partner 6 months ago for refusing to pay protection money," Finn replied, his cheerful demeanor not quite masking the anger in his eyes. "And because Dr. Chen asked me to keep an eye out for you." "Dr. Chen?" "Sarah Chen, xenobiologist extraordinaire and the closest thing this station has to a decent medical facility." Finn gestured for them to follow him deeper into the maintenance tunnels. "She's been treating refugees on the quiet for years. Heard about your passengers and figured you might need extraction assistance." They moved through the station's maintenance network in single file, Finn leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every shortcut and hidey hole in the structure. Zara stayed close to Marcus, her empathic abilities helping her monitor the emotional states of both their rescuer and the pursuing security teams. "Dr. Chen runs a clinic in the abandoned mining section," Finn explained as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. "Technically illegal, but Voss hasn't been able to shut her down because too many station residents depend on her services. Even corrupt officials need medical care sometimes." They emerged from the tunnels into what had once been a mining equipment storage facility, now converted into a surprisingly well-equipped medical center. Dr. Sarah Chen was waiting for them, a woman in her 50s with graying hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of calm competence that came from years of practicing medicine under difficult conditions. 43 refugees, she said, already assessing the group's medical needs with professional efficiency. "How many need immediate attention?" "At least a dozen," Marcus replied, helping Zara settle onto one of the examination tables. "The Lyrians were subjected to neural prod torture, and several have untreated injuries from the original capture." Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "Neural prods on empaths. That's not just torture, it's deliberately designed to cause permanent psychological damage." She moved to examine Zara's broken arm, her touch gentle but sure. "What's your name, dear?" "Zara," the Lyrian replied, then looked at Marcus with an expression that conveyed both gratitude and something deeper. "This is Marcus. He saved us. And from what Finn tells me, you're all in danger of being processed back into slavery," Dr. Chen said, beginning to set up equipment for treating Zara's injuries. "Voss has been running this racket for years. Pirates attack slave transports, kill the crews, then sell the survivors back to their original owners at a markup. Can you help them?" Marcus asked, watching as other refugees began receiving medical attention from Dr. Chen's small staff. "I can treat their injuries," she replied, injecting Zara with something that made the Lyrian's pain lines ease for the first time since Marcus had met her. "But you're going to need more than medical care to get them off this station safely. Voss will have security teams searching every level by now. We'll figure something out, Finn said with the kind of optimism that suggested either foolish courage or a very good plan. First rule of dealing with corrupt officials: always have a better offer than whatever they're currently getting paid. As Dr. Chen worked to set Zara's broken arm, Marcus found himself studying the Lyrian's face in the clinic's improved lighting. The silver sheen to her skin was more pronounced here, and he could see faint patterns beneath the surface that reminded him of circuit traces or neural pathways. Her pointed ears weren't just decorative, they twitched slightly in response to sounds below normal human hearing ranges. "Your people," he said quietly, "how do you survive in a galaxy that treats empaths like luxury commodities?" Zara looked at him with those amber eyes that seemed to see too much. "We don't, mostly. My species has been nearly extinct for 50 standard years. Too valuable as slaves, too gentle to fight back effectively." She paused as Dr. Chen adjusted her arm's position. "That's why what you did matters so much. Most people would have ignored the distress signal." "Most people are smarter than I am," Marcus replied. "No," Zara said, her voice carrying the certainty that came from empathic reading. "Most people are more afraid than you are. There's a difference." Through the clinic's makeshift walls, they could hear security teams conducting searches in the nearby corridors. Voss was getting desperate, which made him more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. "Time to go," Finn announced, checking a portable scanner that showed security patrol patterns. "I've got a route mapped to the docking bays, but it's going to require some creative problem solving." "What kind of creative problem solving?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. Finn's grin was absolutely terrifying. "The kind that involves explosives, misdirection, and a really good understanding of this station's structural weak points." As they prepared to move the refugees again, Zara caught Marcus's hand in her uninjured one. The telepathic contact was brief but intense: gratitude, determination, and something that felt like the beginning of a bond deeper than either of them had expected. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for showing me that not all humans are afraid of caring about strangers." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, feeling something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with adrenaline or tactical planning. "Thank you for showing me that caring doesn't have to be a weakness." Outside, alarms began blaring as Finn's creative problem-solving got underway. But for the first time since picking up that distress signal, Marcus felt like they might actually have a chance. Haven's Rest was the kind of mining colony that existed in the gray spaces between civilization and chaos, too far from major trade routes to attract corporate attention, too poor to interest pirates, and too stubborn to die despite 3 decades of equipment failures and administrative neglect. Which made it perfect for hiding 43 liberated slaves and the increasingly wanted cargo pilot who'd rescued them. Marcus guided the Lucky Strike through the colony's improvised docking facility, threading between ancient mining platforms and jury-rigged power collectors that looked like they'd been installed by optimistic amateurs with flexible safety standards. In the 3 weeks since their dramatic escape from Frontier Station Alpha, he'd learned to appreciate settlements that prioritized function over appearance. Population reading shows approximately 800 residents, his ship's computer announced with its characteristic lack of enthusiasm. Colony established 47 years ago, primary industry abandoned 15 years ago, current status, persistent but economically irrelevant. "Sounds perfect," Marcus muttered, checking his scanners for any signs of consortium security vessels. They'd been moving between remote outposts for weeks, staying ahead of the increasingly aggressive search efforts coordinated by Captain Voss. The man had apparently taken their escape as a personal insult, which Marcus considered both flattering and deeply inconvenient. Zara moved into the cockpit beside him, her arm now properly healed thanks to Dr. Chen's medical expertise and the Lyrian regenerative abilities that made her people so resilient to physical trauma. The psychological healing, Marcus had learned, was more complicated. "The colonists are afraid," she said, her empathic abilities reading the emotional atmosphere of Haven's Rest through the ship's hull. "But not of us specifically. There's a deeper fear here, something chronic. Probably worried about their mining equipment failing," Marcus suggested, though he'd learned to take Zara's empathic reading seriously. Her ability to sense emotional undercurrents had kept them alive more than once during their flight from Frontier Station Alpha. "No," Zara said, tilting her head in the way that meant she was focusing her abilities. "This is fear of abandonment. Of being forgotten. These people have been left behind by something important." Marcus initiated the docking sequence, watching as a delegation of colonists gathered to meet them. The group was led by a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of practical clothing that suggested someone who'd learned to fix things with whatever materials were available. Her expression was cautious but not hostile, the look of someone who'd dealt with unexpected visitors before. "Welcome to Haven's Rest," the woman said once Marcus had cycled through the airlock. "I'm Administrator Lynch. We don't get many cargo haulers out here, especially ones traveling with this many passengers." "Marcus Reed," he replied, shaking her offered hand and noting the calluses that spoke of years working with mining equipment. "These folks are refugees from a pirate attack. We're looking for a place to rest and resupply while we figure out our next move." Lynch's gaze moved past Marcus to the group of Lyrians emerging from the ship, her expression softening as she took in their obvious exhaustion and recent trauma. "Lyrians," she said quietly. "Haven't seen any of your people in years. Used to have a small community here, back when the mines were productive. What happened to them?" Zara asked, stepping forward with the natural grace that Marcus had learned to associate with her species' empathic sensitivity. "Consortium labor recruiters came through about 10 years ago," Lynch replied, her voice carrying old anger. "Offered employment opportunities in the core systems. Most of our Lyrian residents went willingly, they thought they were getting legitimate jobs." She paused, studying Zara's face. "We found out later what those opportunities really were." Marcus felt Zara's emotional response through their growing connection, grief, anger, and a deep sadness that went beyond personal loss. Her people's tragedy wasn't just individual suffering, it was the systematic destruction of an entire culture. "We can offer temporary housing," Lynch continued, "but I should warn you that we're not exactly a thriving community. The mines played out 5 years ago, and we've been struggling to find alternative income sources. Most of our young people have moved to more prosperous worlds." "We're not looking for prosperity," Marcus said. "Just a place to rest while we plan our next move." Lynch nodded, then glanced around the docking bay with the kind of quick assessment that suggested someone checking for eavesdroppers. "There's something else you should know. We've had consortium security vessels pass through twice in the past week, asking questions about refugee smugglers and stolen property. Haven't seen that kind of attention since the mines closed." Marcus exchanged glances with Zara, both of them recognizing the implications. Vasa's search net was tightening, and their temporary refuge might not be as safe as they'd hoped. "We appreciate the warning," Marcus said. "If our presence here puts your people at risk." "These people have been through enough," Lynch interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of firm authority that came from years of keeping a struggling community together. "We'll manage the risks. Besides, Haven's Rest has experience dealing with inconvenient official attention." The temporary housing turned out to be a series of converted mining dormitories that had been maintained in surprisingly good condition despite years of economic decline. The colonists had clearly put effort into making the refugees comfortable, providing clean bedding, basic furnishings, and access to communal facilities that functioned better than anything Marcus had expected. "They're good people," Zara observed as they settled into adjacent quarters that evening. The sleeping arrangements had been organized by Dr. Chen, who'd insisted that Zara needed continued medical observation while her empathic abilities recovered from the neural prod trauma. "Yeah, they are," Marcus agreed, reviewing supply manifests on his portable computer. The colonists had insisted on sharing their limited resources without asking for payment, despite their obvious financial struggles. "Makes me feel even worse about bringing trouble to their doorstep." Zara moved to sit beside him on the simple wooden chair that comprised most of the room's furniture. Her proximity triggered the low-level telepathic connection that had been growing stronger since their escape from the station, not intrusive, but a constant awareness of each other's emotional state that felt increasingly natural. "You're feeling guilty again," she observed, her tone gentle but firm. "The same guilt that drove you to live alone in space before you found us." Marcus looked at her, noting how the colony's warm lighting brought out the subtle patterns in her silvery skin. "How much of my psychological history can you actually read?" "Enough to know that you blame yourself for things beyond your control," Zara replied. "Your military service, the people you couldn't save, the decisions that had consequences you never intended." She paused, studying his face with those unsettling amber eyes. "Among my people, we have a concept called burden sharing. When someone carries guilt or pain alone, it becomes toxic. But when it's shared with others who understand, it becomes manageable." "Telepathic therapy." "Emotional connection," she corrected. "The willingness to let someone else help carry the weight of difficult experiences." Zara reached out and touched his hand, the contact triggering a gentle flow of empathic sharing. "You've been carrying guilt about your war experiences for years. But you've never let anyone help you process it." Through the connection, Marcus felt Zara's perception of his psychological landscape, the carefully buried memories of comrades lost, civilians he'd failed to protect, and the crushing weight of responsibility that had driven him to seek isolation among the stars. But instead of judgment or pity, he sensed understanding and acceptance. "Your people," he said quietly, "how do you handle trauma when everyone can feel everyone else's pain?" "We share it," Zara replied simply. "Grief divided is grief diminished. Pain shared becomes strength." Her expression grew sadder. "But that only works when you have a community to share with. When the neural prods disrupted our empathic connections, many of my people lost the ability to process trauma effectively." Marcus turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. The gesture was simple, human, but the empathic connection that flowed between them made it feel profound. "Is that what's happening with us? Burden sharing?" "Among other things," Zara said, her voice carrying a note of warmth that made Marcus's heart rate increase. "Lyrians don't form casual emotional connections. What's developing between us?" She paused, searching for words. "It's called soul bonding. A deep empathic and emotional link that goes beyond romantic attachment." "How deep?" "Deep enough that we'll always be able to sense each other's emotional state, no matter how far apart we are," Zara explained. "Deep enough that your pain becomes my pain, and my healing becomes your healing." She studied his face carefully. "It's permanent, Marcus. Once formed, a soul bond can't be broken without causing severe psychological damage to both participants." Marcus felt a moment of panic, the familiar fear of commitment and vulnerability that had kept him isolated for years. But through their connection, he also felt Zara's patient understanding and her willingness to wait for his decision without pressure. "What happens if I say yes?" he asked. "Then we complete the bonding process," Zara replied. "You'll gain limited empathic abilities, and I'll be able to share my healing powers with you. We'll be partners in the truest sense, connected but not dependent, unified but not absorbed." "And if I say no?" "Then we remain friends and allies," she said without hesitation. "I won't force a bond on someone who isn't ready for it. Though I should mention that the partial connection we've already developed will likely continue to strengthen whether we formalize it or not." Marcus considered this, weighing his lifelong fear of emotional vulnerability against the growing certainty that Zara represented something he'd never expected to find, someone who understood his darkness without being consumed by it, who offered connection without demanding surrender of his identity. "The timing is terrible," he said finally. "We're fugitives, Voss is hunting us, and we don't even know if we'll survive the next few weeks." "Soul bonds aren't subject to convenient timing," Zara replied with a gentle smile. "They happen when they happen, regardless of external circumstances." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Marcus's communicator. Administrator Lynch's voice came through the device with obvious urgency. "Reed, we need you and your friend at the administrative center immediately. We've got a situation developing." The administrative center turned out to be a converted mining office where Lynch maintained colony records and communications equipment. When Marcus and Zara arrived, they found the administrator staring at a tactical display that showed multiple contacts approaching Haven's Rest. Consortium security vessels, Lynch announced without preamble. 3 heavy cruisers and a command ship, bearing directly for our position. They'll be here in 6 hours. Marcus felt his blood go cold. That's a lot of firepower for a refugee rescue operation. It gets worse, Lynch continued, highlighting additional contacts on the display. We're also reading a bounty hunter vessel and what looks like a slave transport ship. Someone's organized a major operation to take your people back. Through their empathic connection, Marcus felt Zara's spike of terror, not for herself, but for the other refugees who'd already endured so much trauma. The thought of being captured again, of being returned to the conditions they'd barely survived, was almost overwhelming for someone with empathic sensitivity. We need to leave, Marcus said, already running calculations. My ship can carry everyone, but we'll need time to load passengers and supplies. You've got maybe 4 hours before they're in weapons range, Lynch replied. But there's another problem. Our long-range communications have been jammed for the past hour. Someone doesn't want us calling for help or warning other colonies. Marcus stared at the tactical display, recognizing the professional coordination that suggested military-level planning. This wasn't just Voss seeking revenge. Someone with serious resources had decided that 43 liberated slaves were worth a major operation. There's something else, Zara said quietly, her empathic abilities picking up emotional undercurrents that the tactical display couldn't show. The people coming for us. They're not just angry. They're afraid. Desperate. Like they're under pressure from something much worse than bureaucratic embarrassment. Marcus looked at her, seeing his own growing understanding reflected in her amber eyes. The systematic hunting of Lyrian refugees, the military-level resources devoted to recapturing former slaves, the fear that Zara was sensing from their pursuers, it all pointed to something larger than simple criminal enterprise. What aren't we seeing? He asked Lynch. The administrator was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical display with the kind of focus that suggested someone weighing difficult decisions. There have been rumors, she said finally. Stories from traders and refugees about something happening in the core systems. Wealthy collectors paying enormous sums for empathic aliens, especially Lyrians. Not for labor, for something else. What kind of something else? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. The kind that requires live subjects with intact empathic abilities, Lynch replied grimly. The kind that makes 43 rescued Lyrians worth deploying a small fleet to recapture. Through their connection, Marcus felt Zara's understanding crystallize into cold terror. Whatever was happening to her people in the core systems, it was worse than simple slavery. And now they were 6 hours away from being delivered directly into it. We need a plan, he said, studying the tactical display and trying to calculate odds that seemed increasingly hopeless. We need a miracle, Lynch corrected. But maybe we can build one together. The plan that Administrator Lynch called a miracle relied on 30 years of mining explosives, a thorough understanding of asteroid belt physics, and what Marcus was beginning to suspect was either inspired tactical genius or collective insanity. Possibly both. The mining charges are still viable, Lynch explained, indicating positions on a three-dimensional map of the Haven's Rest asteroid field. We've got enough explosive potential to trigger a controlled collapse of the main shipping corridor. Any vessels caught in the debris field will be trapped for at least 12 hours while they clear a passage. And if the collapse isn't as controlled as you're hoping? Marcus asked, studying the blast pattern calculations with the kind of professional skepticism that came from years of dealing with plans that looked perfect until they encountered reality. Then we all die in a spectacular mining accident instead of being captured and sold to wealthy psychopaths, Lynch replied with the sort of dark humor that Marcus was learning to associate with frontier communities. Personally, I consider that an upgrade. Zara stood beside the tactical display, her empathic abilities focused on monitoring the approaching consortium fleet. Through their growing soul bond, Marcus could feel her concentration as she tracked the emotional states of the crews aboard the distant vessels. "They're confident," she reported, her voice carrying the slight distraction that came from maintaining long-range empathic contact. "The command crew believes this will be a simple retrieval operation. But there's something else." She paused, her expression growing troubled. "Fear from the lower ranks. They know more about what happens to captured Lyrians than their officers are telling them." "Can you sense what they know?" Lynch asked. Zara shook her head. "Empathic reading isn't mind reading. I can sense emotions and general intentions, but not specific information." She looked at Marcus with those amber eyes that seemed to see too much. "What I can tell you is that whatever's happening to my people in the core systems, it's bad enough to terrify hardened security personnel." Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. They weren't just fighting to avoid capture, they were fighting to prevent something worse than slavery, something that required live empaths with intact abilities. The desperation driving their pursuers made sense now, as did the military-level resources devoted to what should have been a simple fugitive recovery. "How long do we have?" he asked Lynch. 3 hours until they reach weapons range," she replied, checking the chronometer with practiced efficiency. "The mining charges are already in position, we just need to trigger them at the right moment to maximize the debris field effect." "And the evacuation?" "Already underway. The colonists are loading essential supplies and personal items onto available transports. We should have everyone ready to move within 2 hours." Marcus nodded, then turned to Zara. "What about the other refugees? How are they handling the stress?" "Better than expected," Zara said, though her expression remained troubled. "Dr. Chen has been working with the younger ones, teaching them basic emotional shielding techniques." "But Marcus..." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If we're captured, you need to promise me something." "Zara." "Promise me," she continued, her hand finding his and triggering the warm flow of empathic connection that had become as natural as breathing. "If it looks like we're going to be taken, you'll find a way to disrupt my empathic abilities permanently. Neural damage, chemical suppression, whatever it takes." Marcus felt his heart stop. "I'm not going to brain damage you to avoid capture." "You don't understand," Zara said, her grip tightening on his hand. "What they want from us, it requires intact empathic abilities. If I can't provide what they need, I become worthless to them. They might kill me, but they won't be able to use me." "Use you for what?" Zara was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant as she processed information from sources Marcus couldn't access. "There are stories among my people," she said finally. "Old warnings about what happens to empaths who fall into the hands of certain researchers. Experiments designed to weaponize empathic abilities, to create psychic weapons that can destroy minds from a distance. That's..." Marcus struggled to find words. "That's monstrous." "Yes, it is," Zara agreed. "Which is why you need to promise me that you won't let them take me alive if there's no other option." Through their bond, Marcus felt the absolute sincerity of her request, along with the love and trust that motivated it. She wasn't asking him to kill her, she was asking him to save her from something worse than death. "There won't be a need for that," he said firmly. "Because we're going to get out of this." "How can you be so certain?" Marcus smiled, feeling a kind of reckless confidence that he hadn't experienced since his military days. "Because I've got something Voss and his corporate masters don't expect, a partner who can read emotions across space, a colony full of people who know every rock in this asteroid field, and enough mining explosives to rearrange the local geology. Plus," Lynch added from across the room, "we've got 43 very motivated individuals who've already survived slavery once and have no intention of going back." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity as the evacuation proceeded with the kind of organized chaos that Marcus associated with military operations. The colonists of Haven's Rest moved with practiced efficiency, loading essential supplies onto every available transport while rigging the remaining infrastructure for remote detonation. Dr. Chen worked frantically to complete medical preparations for the journey ahead, while Finn coordinated with other smugglers and free traders to establish safe houses along potential escape routes. The liberated Lyrians helped where they could, their empathic abilities providing early warning of stress points in the evacuation process. Final boarding call, Lynch announced over the colony's communication system. All transports prepare for immediate departure on my signal. Marcus found himself in the Lucky Strike's cockpit with Zara beside him, their empathic connection providing a constant awareness of the approaching threat. The consortium fleet had reached the edge of the asteroid field and was beginning its final approach, confident in their overwhelming tactical advantage. Emotional states are shifting, Zara reported, her abilities focused on the enemy vessels. The command crew is becoming impatient. They want this finished quickly. Then let's not keep them waiting, Lynch's voice crackled through the communicator. All vessels, prepare for emergency departure. Detonation in 30 seconds. Marcus activated his ship's engines, feeling the familiar vibration as the Lucky Strike prepared for what might be her final flight. Around them, dozens of small transports and converted mining vessels prepared to scatter across the galaxy, carrying the refugees and colonists to new lives far from corporate reach. 10 seconds, Lynch announced. Through the viewports, Marcus could see the approaching consortium vessels, sleek, powerful, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen to their carefully planned operation. 5, 4, 3, 2, mark. The explosion was less a sound than a feeling. A deep vibration that seemed to shake reality itself as 30 years' worth of mining charges detonated simultaneously throughout the asteroid field. The carefully calculated blast pattern sent massive chunks of rock tumbling through space, creating a debris field that would take hours to clear. But more importantly, it cut the consortium fleet off from their targets just as the evacuation fleet scattered in dozens of different directions. All vessels, execute dispersal pattern 7, Lynch ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Good luck, and may we meet again under better circumstances. Marcus engaged his ship's jump drive, feeling the familiar disorientation as space folded around them. Through the bond he shared with Zara, he felt her sense of relief and hope. They'd escaped, at least for now. Where are we going? Zara asked as the Lucky Strike emerged from hyperspace near a small trading outpost. Somewhere safe, Marcus replied, though he knew that safety was relative when you were carrying 43 of the galaxy's most wanted refugees. Lynch gave me coordinates for a sanctuary world, independent system, no corporate presence, and a history of protecting people who need a second chance. Over the following weeks, as they made their way toward sanctuary through a series of carefully planned jumps, Marcus felt the soul bond with Zara deepen into something that transcended simple romantic attachment. They were partners in the truest sense, connected emotionally and psychically, but still maintaining their individual identities and independence. The other refugees began forming their own small community, supported by Dr. Chen's medical expertise and Finn's connections in the underground networks that helped political dissidents and escaped slaves find new lives. Some chose to settle on the sanctuary world, while others decided to continue traveling, seeking family members or homeland survivors scattered across the galaxy. What about us? Zara asked one evening as they watched a sunset from the sanctuary world's capital city. The planet was beautiful, green, peaceful, and filled with the kind of hope that came from people building something better from the ashes of what they'd lost. What do you want? Marcus asked, though through their bond he could already sense her thoughts and desires. I want to help others, she said, her hand finding his with the natural ease that had developed between them. There are thousands of Lyrians still in captivity, still being used for experiments or worse. And there are other species suffering the same fate. You want to become professional refugee smugglers. I want to become something the galaxy needs, people who refuse to let atrocities happen just because they're profitable. Zara turned to face him, her amber eyes bright with determination. The bond we share, the connection that saved us from the consortium fleet, we can teach others to form similar bonds. Humans and aliens working together, creating relationships that make them stronger rather than more vulnerable. Marcus considered this, thinking about the journey that had brought them together, his isolation broken by an act of compassion, her trauma healed through genuine emotional connection, both of them transformed by choosing trust over safety. "It's going to be dangerous work," he said. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Zara replied. "But we won't be doing it alone." She was right, Marcus realized. The soul bond they'd formed was just the beginning, a prototype for the kind of deep, resilient connections that could exist between species willing to move beyond fear and exploitation toward genuine understanding. 6 months later, the Lucky Strike had been converted into a mobile rescue and medical facility, with Dr. Chen as chief medical officer and Finn as navigation specialist. They worked with a growing network of sympathetic worlds and organizations, providing sanctuary for escaped slaves and refugees while documenting the systematic abuses that corporate interests preferred to keep hidden. "Distress signal," Zara announced from the sensor station, her empathic abilities confirming what the ship's instruments detected. "Slave transport under attack, approximately 40 life signs aboard." Marcus looked at the tactical display, seeing the familiar pattern of pirate vessels harassing a defenseless transport. 2 years ago, he would have changed course and minded his own business. Now, he felt the same reckless certainty that had driven him to rescue Zara and her fellow refugees. "All hands to rescue stations," he announced over the ship's intercom. "Looks like we've got work to do." As the Lucky Strike changed course toward the distress signal, Marcus felt Zara's hand on his shoulder and the warm flow of their shared connection. They'd both been transformed by their journey together. He'd learned that caring for others was a strength rather than a weakness, while she discovered that healing was possible even after the worst trauma. But more than that, they'd proven that the galaxy's greatest problems could be solved not through force or exploitation, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing connection over isolation, trust over fear, and love over the safe distance that kept people apart. "Ready?" Zara asked as they approached the attacked transport. "Always," Marcus replied, and meant it. They'd found something worth fighting for in each other, and now they were sharing that discovery with anyone brave enough to believe that the universe could be better than it was. The coffee maker in the Lucky Strike's galley had finally been fixed, and was now producing beverages that actually tasted like something humans might want to drink. Marcus chose to interpret this as the universe's way of acknowledging that some changes were worth celebrating, even in small ways.